Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to today's session, looking at what happens when the project manager goes quiet. My name is Brad Cahill, and I'm the head of commercial at Digital Beehive, and I'll be the host for today. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. The first thing you'll notice when you join is that there's a poll question on the screen. There'll be a couple of these that pop up during the webinar. We'll keep them up for about a minute just to give everyone a chance to answer, and then they'll disappear. Everyone's camera has been turned off and microphones have been muted, and they'll remain off for the duration of the session. And then finally, the chat function at the top has been disabled. But if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A section next to the chat function. We'll encourage you to ask questions as we go, and then we'll address them during the Q&A segment towards the end of the session. So, Rob, do you want to move on to the introduction screen? Thank you. So today I am joined by a panel of specialists who combined bring probably around 80 years of experience in the construction industry. So first of all, I'm joined by Rob Gerrard, senior NEC consultant at Thomas Telford, NEC4 contract drafter and accredited mediator with over 43 years experience in the industry, including 31 of those with NEC Contracts. Is a recognised NEC authority, having authored several leading NEC publications, and he's delivered training and consultancy around the globe. Next up is Martin Newman, project director at Turner & Townsend. Martin brings 17 years of NEC experience across a wide range of sectors. He started his career on the contractor side before transitioning to consultancy, where he spent 13 years as a project manager. He's an approved NEC tutor of 9 years, and he regularly delivers NEC accreditation training and bespoke training packages for clients. And then lastly, we have Richard Myers, who is the head of commercial at DSL UK. Richard is an experienced QS with more than 20 years in the construction industry, working mainly with tier 1 contractors across water, highways and rail projects. He's a member of the Chartered Institution of Civil Engineering Surveyors and brings extensive commercial experience with a strong focus on using technology to improve project delivery. Next slide, please, Rob. So, very quick introduction into the session today. So we'll be looking at which ECC clauses need a project manager's response and which ones don't. We'll have a look and explore what the implications are if there is no response, and we'll have a look at how to encourage quick responses. And we'll also get a feel for the project manager and the contractor's perspective, and hopefully there'll be quite an interesting debate there. And then we'll leave maybe 15 minutes or so towards the end of the session for the Q&A. So a question to start us off with: does your project manager always respond within their timescales? And if not, which responses are usually lacking the most? So if you pop your answers to that question within the Q&A section, what we can do is we can start to draw off some of those to sort of weave into the discussion as we go through. So yeah, I'll probably give you about a minute to maybe put some answers in the chat, and then I will hand you over to Mr. Rob Gerrard, who will kick us off in the first part of the webinar. 13% have voted rarely. Do you want to kick us off, Rob, and we'll just pick up the responses as we go through.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fred. What I couldn't see the latest figures. What were they?
We've got 4% always, 58% mostly, 23% sometimes, and 13% rarely.
30. Okay. So it's 50-odd% that perhaps this webinar is aimed at, really, isn't it? And Glenn, thank you, Glenn. First question, and there's a surprise, isn't it? Compensation and quotation responses not on time or at all. It just means I think this webinar is really about silence during the period that the project manager had to say something, be it yes, I accept, or no, do not accept. That really is the pitch of this. We were also talking about future webinars about what happens if the answer is no, or the wrong answer entirely, or not the wrong answer, but an answer which is not in accordance with the contract. So really this particular webinar is just about the silence bit. Doesn't mean silence in the first day. You've got to give the project manager a bit of a chance here, but you know, their allotted time, unless it's extended, if there is silence at the end of that, you know, allocated period, then what happens next? So we thought we'd start by just saying, not all clause in the contract where the contractor makes some sort of submission need a project manager response. But before that, just to realise that pretty well, as certainly from the project manager's perspective, then you are on the clock basically. Every clause in the contract where the contractor submits something for a response by the project manager, the clause itself will either say you've got 1, 2, or 3 weeks or whatever is the duration. If the clause says to the project manager you need to respond but is silent, then we have something called the period for reply, which is in italics and therefore an identified term kicks in. So basically you're always on the clock. You've got to respond within a certain time. And that time is unique to that particular thing being asked of you. Also, where you do actually reply and you say, no, sorry, I do not accept your program or whatever it is, then just a note that under clause 30.4, you've got to give the contractor a bit of a clue here. The clause asks you to say in sufficient detail why it is that you are saying no. And that is obviously to enable the contractor to correct the matter. So it's not, you can't just say no because I don't think it's good enough or it doesn't, you know, comply with the scope. You've got to actually be quite clear about why you are saying no. So which clauses actually need a response? Well, things like, I mean, these are just highlighted. There are a number of them. We just picked a few out. I think went from the first few pages, to be honest. First one is a value engineering proposal, where the contractor proposes, comes up with a really good idea to change the client's scope to reduce waste, basically, to achieve a value engineering outcome. So you need to say, yes, I accept, or no, I do not accept. And so it's silent, this clause, but it must lapse after a certain time, mustn't it? In terms of the project manager has to respond within a period which is 4 weeks. What happens if you don't respond after 4 weeks? What happens if it's 6, 8, or 10 weeks? Surely at a point in time, that value engineering proposal must lapse. You know, the offer, if you remember about the offer, but the proposal was made based upon the reply coming from the project manager within a 4-week period. Clause 16.3, contractor may indeed hire a piece of land adjacent to the site. The site isn't quite big enough to store plant and materials on, perhaps. So they very quickly need to add them to the working areas. Particular issues here, options C, D, and E, unless and until they get them added to the working areas, then that could lead to a big problem in the defined cost in that area of the contractor's people, for example, and equipment would not be recognised unless and until it's part of the working areas. So basically, silence can have a significant impact. Ambiguities, inconsistencies, clause 17.1. Project manager needs to state how it should be resolved. There's no timescale associated with that, and it will depend upon where the ambiguity or inconsistency is, and if indeed the project manager might be able to deal with it. But you've got to be aware that, of course, if there is an inconsistency, 1 coat of paint, 2 coats of paint, how can the contractor proceed until they know the outcome of that issue? So what we're trying to say here, whilst you need to do a response, this is why you need to do a response in a timely fashion. Similar with the illegality and possibility. This particular clause in 17.2, the project manager states how it should be resolved, and then must give an instruction as to, you know, basically repairing, let's say, the impossibility that the scope is asking the contractor to do. Of course, how else can the contractor proceed unless and until that's sorted? Contractor's design, this is a real big ticket one, isn't it? So I mean, it's funny, I've never on a program seen anything other than a single submission, single acceptance, yet I've never witnessed that in practice. You know, multiple submissions and rejections is what I often see, or not acceptances. This is really key, isn't it? So a delay to saying yes or no can get very messy. Whose fault is it? The contractor's fault you're saying no, but is it their fault you're taking more than the time you've got to say no? And also the very important hold point needs to be noting 21.2 that the contractor cannot proceed with that part of the works unless and until they get it accepted. 21.3 allows the design to be submitted accepted in parts only if those parts can be individually assessed. So a really important thing, is the time period, is the time taken during 21.2 to say, yes or no. Design of equipment, clause 23.1. Again, this is submitted for acceptance. You are, of course, able to say, I do not accept as project manager. This only happens if instructed by the project manager. And no, unlike 21.2 design, if you like, of permanent works, there is no equivalent hold point. So contractor may be constructing something, let's say scaffolding. You're curious as to the design of it. You're a bit concerned. The show goes on unless and until you say, perhaps stop that part that works because I do not accept the design. I believe it to be unsafe or some reason like that. Replacement key people, 24.1. Maybe I'm being a bit silly, but could it bring the job to a standstill? It might be the site agent that's gone off ill for quite a period of time. There is no deputy. One might be coming quite soon, but you need to accept that replacement key person, and you're dithering, as a project manager, shall I, shan't I, or I'm off skiing for a couple of weeks or something like that. So, according to the QA's contractor's overall QA management structure, does that mean the job could come to a standstill? Subcontractors submitted for acceptance. Again, the clause is silent, 26.2, on how long you have to say I accept or I do not accept. But the longer you prevaricate means that if the contractor got themselves perhaps a sweet deal with a subcontractor, that deal might be off the table by the time you say yes or no. So many of these, time is of the essence. And where we're obviously going to build up to is how can we shorten these, not delay them further. Again, proposed subcontract documents, if the project manager so wishes to see them, they'll need a response. Do you accept them, yes or no, according to the criteria stated in clause 26.3. And again, delay could possibly lead to more time or cost. If the contractor hasn't yet appointed the subcontractor and the subcontractor's quote lapses, then we have more problems. So there are some clauses that do need a response. There are some that do not need a response. For example, the wonderful clause 15.1, the contractor gives an early warning. 15.1, in a form to be read, copied, and recorded. 13.1, using Digital Beehive's magnificent system, if the scope says so, in clause 13.2. But you don't need to reply. Basically, the project manager is obligated to put it onto the register. Then either the project manager instructs the contractor or the contractor instructs the project manager to attend an early warning meeting if it's other than at the regular one, perhaps every week or every month or whatever period you have in the contract data. But you're not replying to these. So we're notifying, we're instructing that there is no response or reply needed. Interestingly, I think I just found this one recently, or so it seems to me, that under option C to F, where you're asking for pricing documents, it actually doesn't say submit for acceptance. It just says submit. No reference to acceptance at all, unless I'm missing something and it's deemed to be a part of 26.3, which I don't think it is. But anyway, just an interesting observation. So not everything that falls upon the project manager's desk needs a reply, needs a response. So no response, what are the implications? Well, what I would recommend a contractor does is not just sort of knee-jerk. Don't wait till the allotted time is up, the 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. See how they're getting on. Touch base from time to time. How are you getting on with this? You obviously realise the importance of it, but the project manager might be struggling at home or at work. They might be poorly. They might have ill health. Who knows? Or they might, frankly, be incapable or worrying about making a decision or the like. So before slamming them with a notification of compensation because they're late, find out, offer an olive branch, do something about this if you possibly can. So what you can do, of course, is if you realise the project manager's in trouble in time-wise, maybe they're up to here in paperwork, etc. If there's one or two things that are less critical than others, then you can agree on a communication by communication to extend the period for reply to that communication, and that's clause 30.5. You can always do nothing, sit back, do nothing whatsoever, wait for lateness, notify compensation events, and ask for more time or money. I'm not sure that to me is in keeping with mutual trust and cooperation, but it is you following the contract. You're not there to do the project manager's job for them, but you clearly want them as a contractor. You want the project manager to make a decision in a timely fashion. Again, come on to it shortly, but you surely should be looking to help them rather than add to the emotion of it all. But ultimately, if you do not reply as project manager within the time that you should, a compensation event occurs under clause 60.1 bracket 6, and that would fall to the contractor to notify in accordance with clause 61.3, which could be a problem. That could mean project manager gets a slap on the wrist by client. You may say so be it, but they may be in a bit of trouble. That's why they're struggling. Where they do reply, so this one probably we shouldn't put in this webinar, but never mind. Where they do reply, but they don't follow the contract. So they say, I do not like the program that Glenn has submitted, because of course Glenn's programs are always not very good. I don't like the colors that they've used, for example, Glenn. All the colors should be claret and blue, of course, but you've done them all as blue and white. Then that is not following the contract, and the compensation event would occur under clause 60.19 because you've used a reason that is not stated in the contract. So you could be late and use a wrong reason. You could be early and use a wrong reason, or you could be late and use a right reason. Does that make sense? Any of these could happen. What you can do, of course, in 3 parts of the contract is kickstart the deeming acceptance process. So we have them tucked away in the programs, in the compensation event clauses, and also in finalising defined costs for options C to F. We were talking earlier about what behaviour is this likely to drive, and it probably doesn't help the cooperation bit. But I also sympathise with the contractor, particularly for things like a first programme submitted for acceptance. If I'm the contractor, I want that first programme accepted as soon as possible. Without an accepted programme, all sorts of problems occur. Will I get my free issue stuff on time? Until there's an accepted programme, maybe the project manager under clause 64 should be assessing compensation events. And also some compensation events can't actually occur if there's no accepted programme in place. So that is a very important part of the project, is getting at least that first programme accepted and in place. So look, just a little bit more from me, you'd be pleased to hear. So how do we encourage some quick responses? So the third bullet first, smash the timescales, right? So why take 1, 2, or 3, 4 weeks? I mean, in my opinion, a contractor is there spending the client's time and the client's money. And the longer you take to accept things like design, then the longer it's almost inevitably going to be on the critical path. Then you might meet the requirements of the contract and it might be reflected in the program, but you're losing an opportunity to perhaps shorten the critical path. So how do you actually smash the timescales? Well, why not work together during the preparation of the deliverables? Be a pain in the bum to the contractor and invite yourself along to watch Glenn producing the latest revised program. Why have you done that? How about linking that to that? Why didn't you do that? Why do you do that? How about this one? And just proactively challenge and understand at the time of things being created. have design review meetings on a regular basis as it's emerging. So look at, sit down and do joint quotations of conversation events. Don't have that them and us approach. It's crazy. Why do we do that? I've no idea. Somebody prepares something on their own. They submit it to somebody cold. That person starts from scratch reading it, probably misunderstands some of it, says no, and the other person explains why they made the wrong decision in the first place. But, where you can, cooperate, use clause 10.2 to its greatest effect, sit down and observe and or prepare things together. So explain, challenge, tell the truth, assist with evidence calculations. So what are we saying here? As a contractor, don't just say my quotation with the conversation is £10,000, full stop. Obviously, support, explain, substantiate. My favourite clause probably in the conversation process is clause 63.2. So that small money type conversation events and small time, for goodness sake, sit down, use clause 63.2 and say, I think it's worth X. Do you agree? And quickly come to a conclusion. Remember how expensive your professional time is. So that to me is a tremendous clause for very quickly arriving at a sensible solution for small beer type conversation events. So I worry a little bit with the, I still think that a contractor will over-egg a quotation because they're pretty sure the project manager with their red pen will drive it down, old-fashioned style of it. And maybe people, can comment on what that happens still or not. So collaborate in the truest sense. So I don't have a problem with the project manager saying, look, as it is at the moment, I'm afraid I will not be able to accept that because the contract says the following and you have not followed it. And you're telling the contractor openly and honestly that you will say no. And with it, if the contractor ignores that and Glenn submits his program with blue and white bars, you just say, I'm sorry, as I said, no, I do not accept it because blah, blah, blah. That to me is being ethical, is telling the truth, telling it as it is. I don't have a problem with that. But collaborating doesn't mean always saying yes, right? To me, it means working together to create an outcome and, being ethical, telling the truth, being honest, having integrity all the way through. So poll time. So as a project manager, do you find it easier to respond using the contract management system? So Brad knows your answers, right? And if you put no, then he'll be in touch. Yes, it's got to be the answer, isn't it? Anyway, never mind. Let's see. Depends on the system. Brad will be in touch. So let me hand over to the guys to debate the project manager perspective and the contractor's perspective. So Richard and Martin, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. I find myself in a rather unusual position at the moment of normally I talk about NEC contracts in terms of mechanisms and how they work. Rob has way more eloquently undertaken that task than I could do. And now myself, from a project manager perspective, is going to sort of look at some more of the soft skills around the situation of things going quiet on site, and also some of the ways that hopefully we can look to engage from contractor and project manager perspective in terms of trying to make sure that we don't get to that situation. So I think one of the things that we've spoken about when we've been putting these slides together and the sort of the ethos of this overall question of when project managers go silent is at the very start of it, it's about amazingly stakeholder engagement and making sure that you sort of develop relationships with your counterparts. So especially from project management perspective, developing that with a contractor. And one of the key things we discussed about how you could sort of really help engage with the other party, lowercase p, is very much having sort of in-person meetings. So this is great in terms of having sort of Teams meetings, but I suppose we all sort of remember back in the day with regards to sort of COVID, or actually now it's sort of 6 years on. We've probably got a cohort of people coming into the industry who don't actually remember that in a work sense. They will do from probably an educational sense, and also that sort of forced fun style of having to listen to your uncle come up with a Zoom questions with regards to family quiz, and be quite annoyed that you thought the answer was slightly different to other people. But one thing that when you are having meetings like that is that you sort of you'll be in meeting mode and with the rest of your counterparts, and if it's a particularly long meeting, you go away and make a coffee and come back. Now if you're in person, you go away and make that coffee, and you sort of your guard drops to an extent, and you sort of you could have a chat about I mean, as you may have got the undertow from Rob's part, he's an Aston Villa fan, and we've got people on the call who Birmingham City fans as well. So you sort of and at which point you sort of start to develop a different relationship. Now, I'm not saying it has to be football, but when you get to know the person, you then start to understand how that person operates, and that then sort of will take us into that whole. You get into a more stakeholder management situation, because there's also, I think I've also put there about understanding drivers as well with regards to it. You might, from a project manager perspective, they may be working within for a client that has particular governance processes in place, and those governance processes aren't necessarily recognised under the contract. Contract is very clear in terms of what has to happen, although they may be operating within a restrained environment for what they can actually provide instructions for. And if they don't do it in timescales, there's clauses in the contract which will impact the client as a result of it. So it's understanding these sort of situations, and I think that's it's really important to make sure that to start with, you develop relationships that allows that whole 10.2 to take place. Not saying there's anything other than 10.1, as in following the contract, but it's really important that we sort of talk to each other and understand the other's opinion. Wasn't expecting that, but
if I can, Martin, just building
absolutely.
On that. So from a contractor's perspective, and also looking at it from a project manager's perspective, it is very much dependent on your workload and what you're doing. Many different people on the call today, so some will have multiple projects that they're managing or working on, others maybe on single big projects. So understanding who your opposite number and project manager and contractor are is critical. It's key to getting it done early, understanding that person. We've got in-person meetings, which for me, there's no real substitute, but one of the things that I speak to my team about is actually the person that you're dealing with, they may have a preferred method of communication for an informal conversation because they're in meetings and they're busy all day. So if you're not in the same site and you're not in the same location, you might find that actually WhatsApp is how they work, or they like to communicate on Teams. So take the time to understand your project manager and understand how they like to receive the information. The relationship is key to both parties and ultimately the project delivering value for money. And bringing back to what Martin mentioned about the drivers, I think sometimes contractors and subcontractors have a short understanding and what goes through as a compensation event. They may not fully understand how it is impacting the project manager and their approvals. For instance, Martin may have approval limits which need to go through governance calls, which take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And there's also a set of processes and a set of documents. So anything that the contractor can do to make sure that information is easily read and understood and communicated, so that any approvals that need to be gone through have the information there and then. What you don't want to happen is the project manager may go quiet because they don't have the approval to accept a compensation because it goes above the value. Whilst that's not in accordance with the contract, that's the reality of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And depending on the business you work in, you'll have different approval limits. So supporting your project manager and providing the substantiation and detail that tells the story is key to ensuring that there isn't a lack of communication.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. And yeah, just building on what Richard's saying there as well, understand the person, absolutely critical. And I've mentioned about workload, which I've got down in my slide there. One of the bits I really want to get through, and I would say this to everyone in terms of unblocking silence, is we get, as project managers and also contractors, but as project managers, as that sort of figurehead for the contract, we get a significant amount of communication. And that communication, and taking the word communicate as it's understood under the contract under clause 13, that sort of communications clause. If I could just ask everyone to go away from this, and if you only took one thing away from it, I know it's mine, but if you could only take one thing away from it, I would say speak first and communicate second. If we can get into a routine of basically having those discussions, and sometimes the harder discussions land so much easier when the communication that comes through whatever platform, Digital Beehive, apparently others are available as well. But when that comes through, people read things differently to how someone thinks they've written it. If you've got a narrative behind that already in your head of how that's coming through, you're way more likely to sort of understand and emphasize or just basically see a point of view which you might not have necessarily picked up straight away if it had just come through cold. So that's my sort of real takeaway with regards to stakeholder management. Talk to each other, and after that you've got discretionary contract mechanisms, which Rob's already touched on, which you can use. You know, the main options with regards to invoking the sort of the elements under the contract for deemed acceptance and such like. But I'm going to try the tap on the nose and see if that
works brilliantly. That was fantastic. No one saw that. Brilliant.
Sorry, just quickly, one of the things that Martin highlighted was about communicating first and having that conversation and explaining that what's written and what's said can be interpreted in different ways. And one key thing that I've come up against for all the years that we've been doing this is that there's sometimes a bit of a stigma about talking about money, and people are often frightened, scared, or worried about submitting. Or on the other hand, they really like it and they like to wind up the project manager or like to wind up the contractor. So being bold and being open with the communication, not hiding, you know it's a big issue. Don't sit back and ignore it until don't think that it's going to go away. Start those conversations. It may not be anything, but I can guarantee you're better having that conversation early than trying to deal with it once it's hit and it's a big problem.
Totally agree, Richard. And in sort of weird synergy, which we hadn't actually planned as yet, I felt like I should have done that to take us back to the previous slide. But actually, this linked in beautifully with the clear ask element. So exactly what Richard said, that sort of clear communications, and part of that is almost effectively having that upfront discussion to then, so you can land it easier. But if you have that upfront discussion and something comes through and it's just like, I don't even know what this is trying to get across, and that is when you really need to, sort of going back to Richard's point, is delivering a really sort of clear and reasonable substantiation of what's going on in terms of so some of it, we've got dividing data in the contract, so obviously you've got actual cost element to something. A lot of it will be forecast, and a lot of that forecast is going to tie back to a program, and that program is going to have to be sufficiently detailed for the element of, let's say, a compensation event that's required. So having a really good program that you can rely upon to take us into that sort of detail, and also the resources which are likely to be used and how they're going to be used, that's really important from my perspective. And whenever I've been involved in claims, so whether it was when I worked for a contractor or working as a project manager in the sort of consultant space, is making something readable, taking the other party, small p, on a journey which will actually allow them to at least understand it and be able to interrogate the bits that they need to interrogate, rather than it just being sort of a bit of a random smudge of information which you think covers everything but hasn't actually got that narrative from start to finish. So I think that's quite an important piece. I don't know if you want to come in there, Richard.
Yeah, so the making it readable, it sounds simple, but we are also busy in our day jobs. We've got a lot going on probably at home. We've got a lot going on at work. I don't know anyone that's got sufficient resources to do everything that they need to do. So we're all busy, right? So don't rush your communications. Don't think that you've got it and just throw it across, because it will not contain the detail that will support you in generating your compensation event and the additional increase to the total of the prices. You need to make it crystal clear. Write it down, get it checked by anyone. Sometimes you're so far in the detail, you forget to take a step back and read what you've actually written. So make it readable that anybody of any level could actually understand your communication and what the intention is. There may be some technical bits to it depending on the projects, but the real aspect of it is making it clearly understandable for your project managers, so it gives them the best chance of understanding what you want out of this communication.
Spot on. Cheers, Richard. I think in terms of getting anyone to look at things to an extent, obviously if you're working in the defence sector, be really sort of clear on who can actually view it and such like. But in terms of being able to describe something, if you struggle to describe something, it's probably not a lack of overall knowledge there. It's that you don't understand it well enough to describe it simply. I think there's very much a sort of school of thought or school of education and teaching, but if you can explain something simply, then you really truly understand the concept. And sometimes when something sounds really highfalutin, it's just complicated, and we've got to try and break it down into one of our sort of key ethos of NEC anyway, in terms of clarity and simplicity. But
it's just reminded me, Martin, sorry, you're as much as making it clear and simple, there are so many communications that going over the top because they're trying to do too much, at which point your project manager is going to pick it up and go, no, that's not going to give me any information. I've not got 2 minutes to read that, and it goes to the back of the pile.
Yeah, really good, really good point. And then finally, with regards to from escalation, sort of moving things on, we have touched on this sort of slightly with Rob's slides, but obviously as a contractor, in terms of making the PM less silent, you've got the sort of semi-nuclear option of going to the client and going, you do realise your project manager is not doing what they're meant to be doing, sort of thing. Although I would suggest that this is done once they've sort of failed to do something and you've discussed it with them, just to sort of keep that relationship reasonable, rather than going straight to the client, even though they might be within time scale. So there's very much a sort of strategy with using sort of escalation processes, and obviously if something's actually been done or such like within the contract, we've obviously got the resolving and avoiding dispute sort of thing, but very much with regards to trying to make sure that you do have options. It's just when to use those options as well. And I think that takes us to the next part. I can actually now scratch the other side of my nose because it was really itchy, but I then realised that I was potentially going to use the special code to move it to a different slide.
Thanks, Martin. And as you probably appreciate, there is a lot of synergy between the conversations and what both Martin's view and my view is of how we actually make this work and how we are proactive in delivering these projects. So again, we spoke about it earlier, but knowing your PM, understanding how they like to communicate, understanding what drives them, what their key issues are. Different project managers have different KPIs potentially. Some don't like seeing early warnings. I've come across that before, even though it's designed to actually help and support the project. So you generate something called an early warning, which helps them out of a hole. So it's all about relationship management and being collaborative, and ensuring that you are supporting them, because ultimately, I think both Rob and Martin have spoke about invoking certain acceptances. But it's a nuclear option, and it's not one that is, I don't think, ever comes across very well. If you do it early, you've caused yourself a problem for the rest of the project. And if you do it late, you're probably going to struggle for additional work, if I'm honest. So again, understanding the communication preference, the text, the WhatsApps, by any means. Just make sure you keep that dialogue going, whether it's one PM you're dealing with or whether you've got 50 PMs. You've got to, from a contractor's point of view, you want the money, you've got to show the willing and able to move your preferences to support your PM to ensure you get paid. Again, clear and simple language. I've got people that I've worked with in the past that they would go through a thesaurus to try and change it to make it sound more complicated and convoluted. And for me, simple is best, and that is the principle of the NEC. So let's keep that going.
Absolutely. Can I just quickly say, with regards to looking at this through a contractor's lens, this could also be looked through exactly through the PM lens as well, in terms of knowing your contractor, understanding how they communicate as well. And that clear and simple language is so important in terms of, we're not trying to do not overcomplicate things. Make things as straightforward as possible. If we make things as straightforward as possible, then we're not getting lost in translation in terms of what something is. Let's call whatever something is that. It's a spade, not a digging receptacle. But let's just keep it nice and straightforward.
Which goes into my next point about helping your PM and actually checking in, making sure that they're all right. Because sometimes some of these contracts that we undertake are technically challenging, and therefore it's okay to not understand everything that's written down. So your best bet is talking to your PM, making sure they understand what's happening, understand the impact of what is the potential effects of these potential issues of not accepting or not communicating. And down here, it's in yellow, but honesty in your communications. I know Rob brought it up earlier about contractors adding a load of WAD to their compensation event quotations and getting it all redlined out. So the principle for me is that's not how it is. It needs to be, in particular reference to compensation event quotation, price it as it should be priced. Be honest. I had a junior with me the other day, and I was like, you will find that different PMs have different requirements, and there are some that we know that there are challenges of you have to reduce compensation event quotations by maybe 10% or by 20%. But by understanding your PM and understanding that knowledge, it's better to generate and move that information away so that they don't get caught out, and that they understand that the quotations going in are realistic for what it is. And I've had it before that on these big quotations, a soft landing is a much more effective method. So walking them through the quotation, explaining why, explaining the rationale of certain costs and certain aspects, which I'll be honest, when it comes through as good as any system can be, like Digital Beehive, a big number frightens people. So explaining someone, going through the quotation, explaining if this is a must, or we can make an assumption and reduce it, or we can manage it an alternative way. But be honest in what we're doing, and you're more likely to get the answer you want.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, totally, in terms of understanding the works, as a contractor, you may well be doing some really significant technical works. As a project manager, that might not be your wheelhouse. You might not be specialised in that area. Learn from the contractor in terms of those areas. You might have delegated powers to then take it back to someone else to review different things. But from a PM side, stay curious with regards to that. Don't be embarrassed about your lack of knowledge there. It's an opportunity to understand better. And yeah, soft landing with regards to things coming forward. Totally on board with that. But yeah, spot on. Cheers, Richard.
Thank you. The last two are, so the drumbeat. Again, Martin brought this up earlier about getting something in the diary. Putting meetings in the diary early is key. The last thing you want to be doing is starting to have issues on site, and then you start trying to create an early warning meeting or a risk reduction meeting or quotation meeting. However you and your PM want to manage these reviews, do it early, get it in the diary, put the time in. If it's half an hour to start, go with that. If it only takes 5 minutes, give yourself the 25 minutes to do something else after, but keep those communications and those channels open. But you also, again, you need both parties, we need to be agile. There will be a build up at some point of compensation events or responses, quotations. Understand that you may need to increase that frequency or reduce it, depending on where you are on the project and what is currently happening. So be agile in managing that situation. And I say the appropriate engagement. Depending on the project, you're at some of these massive projects, you've got significant levels of authority still within a single project. So ensure that you've got the people that can make the decisions in the meeting. And again, in some of these technical events and communications, have them available so they can discuss it with the technical people on the other side. Because quite frequently, I'll be honest, some of these technical conversations are far above my head and I've got no understanding. So you need to make sure that your commercial team are open to ensuring that your technical team are providing the support, because the same will go through as it goes through to a PM. They will not always understand everything that's written down. So you have to have the engagement from your operational and technical teams.
Yeah, I've concur. I almost feel like it's the least PM contractor discussion that will happen today, but I absolutely agree with Richard in terms of getting that drumbeat. I mean, takes it back to anyone who's done NEC ETC accreditation. Very much that sort of getting that commercial drumbeat, but just general drumbeat in general for communications and things to continue working collectively. Silence occurs because people retreat, and they may retreat because of too much information. It's like almost information overload because they've got too much work on, or they're trying to work out what is actually the nub of a question or an issue or something like that. By having it out in the open, it stops it from being that silence and allows things to progress. But yeah, cheers, Richard.
No problem. And then just to kind of sign off from the contractor side, again, we've got to be agile. So I've got down here, we've got to be proactive and reactive. So again, we have a completely broad spectrum of what people are working on, whether it's one project, 50 projects, under one client or 50 clients. So you have to, as a QS and as a contractor, understand what you're getting into in your contracts with your clients. Understand what the contract terms are, what the compensation events are, what the Z clauses are, because there's very few contracts that I've seen that are unamended. So you need to understand what's been taken out. Quite frequently, we know that the deemed acceptances are taken out. And so understanding the timescales of when you're expecting it. The last thing you want to be doing is saying, oh yeah, I'm expecting a response back in 7 days, but actually the contract that you signed up to gave them 10 weeks. So it doesn't support. So make sure you understand what you're signing up to. Try and engage in those negotiations where you can to generate a reasonable position for both parties. which comes into the pre-contract. We understand as a contractor that sometimes these contracts are out the box and we cannot amend them. But if we can, make sure that they're reasonable for both parties. Quite frequently you see it's a short turnaround for one and a lovely big one for another. So let's try and make sure that we generate those contracts to be supportive of actually delivering what's required for the project. And the last, so that's the proactive and understanding, engaging with your PM. The last part for me is about being reactive as well. So I briefly spoke about it when we spoke about the drum beats and the meetings that we set up, and reacting to the volume of work, but also to the people. The teams may change, especially on these big projects. You have people coming in, changing, you have additional resources, you have a change of management. You need to keep the dialogue, keep the clear communication, keep the formal communication going, because you might come across one PM at one time that will go, actually, don't worry about it, we'll do this all offline. Well, actually, you need to protect yourself as a contractor, and the PM would have to do the same as well. So make sure that you're aware of what the changes are that's going on. The other effect is behaviours. Depending on where you are on a project and what the situation is, behaviours may change. Early doors on a project, most people are collaborative, most people are holding hands together and will work together and everything will be okay. Unfortunately, what we find is that as we get through and we get to the real challenging part of the project, as we work towards the end, those conversations become a lot tougher. There's a lot more friction, there's a lot more hard conversations to be had. Some of those are for reasons beyond our control. Sometimes it's funding, sometimes there's budget controls, sometimes there's COVID. So we need to be able to adapt to those behavioural changes as well, and make sure that we provide the written and clear communication, preferably in a central location like Digital Beehive, where you can keep track of everything that's going on, because it will change through your contract. I've not come across one where it's not.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I think we've actually only got 3 minutes left of the meeting, so I don't think we're going to actually have any time to cover off Q&A. So we've got one closing question, but what we'll do is we'll go through the comments and the questions that have been made on the chat and the Q&A function, and we'll cover those off and address those in the follow-up email. What we'll do is we'll send a copy of the slides and a recording of the session to everyone that's attended today, and we'll also make sure that you've got the contact details of all of the speakers. So if you do have any follow-up questions or you need any advice or support, we'll get that circulated after the session. But I suppose that the last thing to do is say a big thank you to everyone for attending the webinar, and an even bigger thank you for our speakers, Rob, Richard and Martin, for taking the time to deliver the session. Any closing remarks, gentlemen, before we finish up?
Nothing extra for me. I was trying to work out, do we get paid extra for the
right? Yeah,
I mentioned the Beehive. I've just realised at that point it was, yeah, but it felt like we didn't. I didn't mention it enough. So, but yeah, Digital Beehive, really good system.
I can confirm that none of the speakers were paid for plugging Contractor. and I think, Rob, the Birmingham Villa rivalry was only mentioned 3 or 4 times, so that's pretty good for us.
Well, yeah, I would say that this one, I've been going a long time today. This morning at 7 a.m. I was doing some training for Sydney Water. Who was on the line? A Birmingham City fan. 7 o'clock tonight, who's online? Another Birmingham City fan. So it's been a bad day. Okay.
You got both of them, Rob.
But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.